Back to India. The words carved through the auditorium like shards of glass, hanging in the air almost too sharp to breathe in. Karoline Levitt didn't shout them. No. She laced them with smug calm, the kind that disguises cruelty as casualness. It was meant to sting like an aside, but instead it landed like an explosion no one could ignore. For a split second, the entire room froze. It wasn't just sound that stopped. It was breath. It was heartbeat. You could see jaws slacken, eyes darting sideways, whispers swallowed mid-sentence. A young student in the front row covered her mouth, an older veteran. 2 rows back, shook his head slowly, disbelief painted across his face. The cameras kept rolling, but even in the footage you can feel it. Time stretched out as an ancient prejudice, one that immigrants thought they had buried under decades of service, sweat, and sacrifice, was suddenly unearthed in the cruelest of modern spotlights. This wasn't a private slip in an unguarded moment. It wasn't a mumbled insult caught on a hot mic. This was an audible rejection of identity delivered in the middle of a public debate floor. In one cruel sentence, Levitt didn't just aim at Kash Patel. She invoked centuries of taunt hurled at anyone perceived as other, anyone asked to prove their loyalty again and again, anyone told America was theirs only on borrowed terms. The reaction was instantaneous, but fractured. A few clapped, uncomfortable in their own applause. Others hissed. Some gasped audibly, as though words so blunt couldn't possibly have been spoken in a year like this one. But perhaps the most chilling sound was silence, the kind of silence that doesn't come from agreement, but from shock, so deep nobody quite knows which way to turn. In that moment, all eyes naturally slid toward Patel. He hadn't spoken yet. He hadn't moved. His expression, calm, unreadable, almost too still, was itself a counterpunch. Behind those eyes carried the weight of every immigrant family ever told to pack their bags, every child ever mocked in a schoolyard for the way their parents spoke, every patriot forced to prove their Americanness was real. The insult intended to diminish him had, instead, magnified the stakes of what was about to unfold. Silence was roaring, anticipation mounting like electrical current in the room. But what happened next, not even her own supporters could have predicted. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand who Karoline Leavitt is and how she operates. Young, ambitious, and hungry for influence, she built her brand on being unapologetic. Every jab, every smirk, every one-liner was crafted to set social media aflame, to capture headlines, to crown herself the bold warrior screaming what others only dared whisper. To her followers, she wasn't reckless. She was authentic. To her critics, she was reckless disguised as fearless. Either way, the strategy was clear. The louder the clash, the larger the spotlight. So when her eyes narrowed at Kash Patel, and she spat out that insult, it wasn't a slip. It was a move, a choice. But some choices carry consequences that echo far beyond the arena that burst them. For many watching, the insult wasn't a personal shot fired at one man. It was an ancient curse revived, a reminder of how quickly the American dream can be sneered at, how fragile belonging can feel for those who've had to fight for the right to claim this country as their own. Everyone who has ever been asked, "Where are you really from?" understood the sting immediately. Parents who tucked their kids into bed, reminding them to be brave at school, felt a knife twist. Millions saw Patel not as himself alone, but as a mirror reflecting back their own family survival, sacrifice, and relentless determination to carve out space in a country that sometimes tempts them with open arms and other times shoves them away with contempt. This is exactly why the stakes could not be higher. On that debate stage, in that one jarring insult, the conversation instantly became larger than politics. It became about identity. It became about what we choose to recognize as truly American. And if Patel had faltered, if he had laughed it off, trembled under the weight, or worse, stayed silent, it would not have been one man conceding a point. It would have been millions quietly told once again that their place is conditional, that their citizenship comes with an asterisk, that dignity can be mocked without consequence. And dignity matters. Dignity is the currency immigrant families carry when they have nothing else to spend. Dignity is what fathers and mothers remind their children about before the first day of school, before job interviews, before walking into rooms where they'll be judged by the shade of their skin or the sound of their name. Dignity was what had been attacked in front of live cameras. And in that instant, dignity demanded an answer. Imagine the ripple effect across the nation if no answer came. Headlines would spin it as tense but forgettable, a passing remark lost in the noise of political theater. Meanwhile, in living rooms across America, families who would face their own go-back moments would shake their heads in quiet despair, reminded once more of their precarious position in the story of this country. To leave those words unchallenged would be to leave every wound reopened. That was the invisible battle unfolding now. Patel wasn't just carrying his own honor. He was carrying the weight of every story that intersects with his. The eyes locked on him weren't merely curious. They were expectant, pleading even, desperate for a counter not delivered with rage, but with the pride of someone who refuses to be diminished. And yet, while her words burned like acid, her own backstory carried cracks ready to break open under pressure. Karoline Leavitt did not stumble onto that stage by accident. She fought her way into the limelight through a brand of politics crafted for sharp impact and quick attention. Young, fresh-faced, and relentlessly energetic, she cultivated an image of the fearless disruptor. To her supporters, she was a breath of fresh air, finally someone who said what she meant and didn't care about being polite. To her detractors, she was something else entirely, a performer who mistook swagger for substance, who leaned on outrage instead of ideas. And in many ways, both sides were right. Her rise was fueled not by policy depth, but by a mastery of the modern age of clips and clicks. Every debate appearance, every panel sit-down, every media interview was treated as an audition for virality. She didn't just answer questions. She looked for the line that could be lifted, typed up, and spread like wildfire across social feeds. The sharper, the crueler, the punchier, the better. Nuance was disposable. Strategy was less about convincing the undecided than about thrilling the already convinced. It worked, too. Television anchors rolled their eyes, but online, among circles eager for confrontation, Levitt's name began circulating, her videos garnering attention in precisely the way she wanted. Fast, furious, and full of noise. That kind of strategy breeds a false invincibility. The more a politician thrives off applause lines, the more they begin to confuse applause with armor. Levitt became addicted to the rhythm of gasps and cheers, convinced that if she could stun people into silence, she had already won. The problem was that strategy relied on constant escalation. A snide smirk one week demands a harsher insult the next. An edgy quip soon feels stale unless sharpened into a full-on attack. In time, the pursuit of attention morphs into a dependency, and like all dependencies, it creates blind spots. Her blind spot was empathy, or rather, the absence of it. When speaking about immigrants, women, or minorities, she often spoke with a casual dismissal of someone who never considered the cost of words. For her, culture war jabs weren't personal. They were performance. Something said today was forgotten tomorrow. Another domino tipped in a never-ending row of headlines. But for those on the receiving end, her mockery hit deep, leaving scars. Levitt never measured those costs because she didn't have to. Attention came either way. And behind the applause, she mistook the sound of division for the sound of dominance. This arrogance wasn't hidden. It was her strategy. She cut down opponents not with debate prep or statistical mastery, but with one-liners. When others hesitated, she lunged. When confronted with complexity, she smiled tightly and scoffed. It gave her the aura of confidence, yes, but confidence of a brittle kind, confidence that cracked easily when the spotlight shone a little too brightly or when the opponent struck with more than just volume. And here lay the dangerous irony. Levitt's greatest weapon, her brazenness, was also her greatest liability. Each time she leaned further into provocation, she took on a little more weight, a little more hubris. She began to believe she could say anything, and the fallout would always bend in her favor, because until now it had. She was media trained to parry questions, to twist critiques into boasts, even to wear outrage as proof of her effectiveness. But while she was prepared for pushback, she was far less prepared for something else. The calm, steady dismantling by someone who understood how to turn gashes into mirrors, someone who would use her own hostility to reflect back the very emptiness beneath her attacks. That's what makes her story ironic. She thought she was the archer, stringing bow after bow, arrows tipped with snideness and barbs. But she didn't realize she was also carrying her own undoing on her quiver, the arrogance itself. Because history tells us the same lesson over and over, arrogance, when inflated by applause and unchecked by humility, has an expiration date, and it often expires at the exact moment its wielder believes they are untouchable. Think about the rhythm of her trajectory. Bright bursts of noise, a carousel eclipse, 1,000 social likes at a time, ambition rushing faster than experience, confidence ballooning faster than wisdom, a young politician believing she defined the room, until the moment she realized the room was no longer laughing with her, but holding its breath for someone else. And so, there she stood on that stage, sneer curling across her lips, voice dripping with venom as she told Kash Patel to go back to India. It was supposed to be her clincher, her crowd pleaser, the kind of line she imagined would dominate headlines and spark chatter. What she didn't understand, what arrogance never lets its bearer understand, is that sometimes a line meant to solidify power becomes a very moment that exposes weakness. She had wanted this clash to be remembered for her knockout blow. Instead, it became remembered for what followed the insult, for how easily her candor exposed the rot beneath her confidence. And that's when Kash Patel, armed not with insults but with a story, stepped into the ring. Before Kash Patel became a name etched into the headlines, he was simply the son of two immigrants who carried a dream across oceans. His parents arrived in America from India with little more than determination tucked inside their suitcases. They didn't know exactly what form their future here would take. They only knew it would demand sacrifice. They worked relentless hours in small shops, sometimes late into the night, saving dime by dime while whispering to themselves that the day would come when their children would not have to start so close to the margins. In their household, discipline wasn't optional. It was the soil the family grew from. His father would urge, dignity must never be bartered away. Work can break your back, but never your honor. His mother embodied that promise. She would arrive home exhausted, her clothes infused with the smells of her labor. Yet she still found a way to remind her children that education, persistence, and service were the keys to belonging. Weekends were not breaks. They were lessons in endurance, in reminding the children that no one could take away the pride of knowing they built something with integrity. Kash absorbed these lessons like marrow in his bones. He grew up watching his parents endure unsmiling stares, backhanded comments, subtle nudges of exclusion. On the schoolyard, classmates asked him the same tired question many immigrant kids hear. Where are you from? No, where are you really from? Patel learned that silence could hurt, but so could fire. He learned there was another weapon, composure. Composure was armor. Composure was how his parents survived, and it became the foundation of how he would thrive. He worked relentlessly, driven not by the hunger for fame or applause, but by the duty instilled in him from day one. Law school sharpened his mind. The courtroom sharpened his spirit. As a prosecutor, he faced defendants, juries, and pressure, but always carried that quiet thread of integrity back to the home his parents built. He didn't need the spotlight. He needed justice to feel real. Later, serving in national security roles during some of the nation's most perilous times, Patel again relied on that foundation. Calm when others flinched, steady when chaos demanded action. His presence in those circles wasn't always welcomed. Brown skin and an immigrant name aren't always badges of belonging in closed, powerful rooms. But Patel stayed. He kept walking into those rooms, no matter the whispers or raised eyebrows, because he knew his parents hadn't sacrificed everything so he could shrink to every turn. People underestimated him. Some assumed he'd caved to pressure. Others thought his heritage made him somehow less American, less faithful to the story draped in stars and stripes. Kash Patel proved them wrong each time, not with anger, not with self-righteous tirades, but with competence and unwavering loyalty to the country that had once asked his family if they truly belonged. His story resonates with anyone who's ever been told they were not enough, not American enough, not experienced enough, not the right background, not the right face, not the right surname. Millions of families, immigrant families toiling quietly, black families fighting legacies of injustice, Latino families carving futures from fields and factories, Asian families pushing past stereotypes. see themselves in Patel's discipline and his refusal to bow. That's why, when Karoline Leavitt sneered those words, Patel didn't flinch. His entire life had been preparing him for moments exactly like this. His resilience wasn't forged in think tanks or television studios. It was forged in his parents' sweat. It was forged in late nights of study, in his own quiet battles against bias, in the knowledge that dignity doesn't beg for acknowledgement. It asserts itself calmly and unapologetically. If arrogance was Leavitt's signature trait, resilience was Patel's. If her fuel was attention, his was discipline. She had risen quickly, betting on theatrics. He had risen slowly, betting on service. One was a house of cards built for applause. The other was granite, carved slowly over decades of trials and tests. It is no exaggeration to say Patel embodied the quiet pride of immigrant families everywhere who now watched their reflection on that stage. He was not just one man. In that moment, he became the weight of generations, people who had been told to leave, to go back, to step aside, and who chose instead to stay, to build, to fight, and to claim space. His calm expression after the insult wasn't detachment. It was defiance covered in grace. And while Leavitt carried the swagger of someone who believed the stage was hers to dominate, Patel carried something deeper, a lifetime of silent preparation. Her weapons were words meant to wound. His weapon was his story, and it was sharper than anything arrogance could deliver. Their paths collided on that stage, and the first blows came swift and sharp. The insult had already shifted the mood of the auditorium, but Karoline Leavitt wasn't finished. Rather than retreating after the gas that swept through the room, she leaned in further, doubling down with the smug confidence of someone who built a career out of turning outrage into fuel. She smirked, her chin tilted high, and launched into a tirade about real Americans, drawing hard lines between those she deemed worthy of belonging and those she mocked as perpetual outsiders. The word authentic was stretched in her mouth like a weapon, contrasted against Patel's heritage, as though his brown skin and immigrant lineage somehow rendered him counterfeit. Her jabs weren't elegant. They were blunt, jagged, and designed to elicit a reaction. And they did. From one corner of the room came applause, sharp and almost offensive, the clapping of those who wanted the moment of cruelty validated. But just as strong were the recoils, the audience members who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, who whispered and shook their heads, who could not believe what they were hearing in a space meant to showcase ideas for a nation's future. What should have been a discussion of policy had turned into a theater of prejudice. The tension climbed higher with each word from her mouth, like the screeching of strings in a film score before the final, shattering crescendo. Patel stood still through it all, hands folded on the podium, gaze fixed but calm. He allowed her words to echo, to take up every ounce of space they demanded, while he quietly measured the silence that followed. For silence, he knew, can be louder than shouting when wielded correctly. Each insult she delivered was supposed to bruise him, but instead it only revealed her dependence on provocation. The more she spoke, the more transparent it became. She was grasping for dominance, overcompensating, mistaking the noise of her supporters for victory. Kash Patel, meanwhile, let the tension accumulate. He didn't take the bait, didn't interrupt, didn't roll his eyes or smirk. He simply listened, cataloging each word like a patient prosecutor waiting for the moment to dismantle a witness's testimony. Inside, of course, the weight was heavy. Patel is human. No one can be told their very existence is fraudulent without feeling the burn. But the fire that rose inside him never spilled out in anger. He carried it with discipline, engineering it into resolve. His parents had taught him that anger only serves your opponent. Dignity robs him of power. And so he waited, poised, calm, but visibly preparing. The subtle tightening of his jaw, the glint of focus in his eyes, signaling that something was coming, something decisive. The audience could feel it too. Murmurs began to fade. The wavering applause stumbled into awkward hushes. Every heartbeat in the room seemed tethered to Patel's still figure, waiting for action. Leavitt, blind to the shifting energy, continued swaggering, mistaking her own volume for momentum. She didn't notice that each line left her smaller, not larger, diminished by the overreach of someone convinced of her own invulnerability. Patel's composure became the strongest presence on that stage. His refusal to lash out turned into an almost unbearable anticipation. It was a political equivalent of a duel, one combatant flailing, hurling everything they had, while the other stood in place, weapons sheathed, calculating the single strike that would end the fight. The auditorium buzzed like an electric wire ready to snap. The suspense now belonged not to Levitt and her insults, but to Patel and his silence. Each second he delayed amplified expectation, building toward the question hanging in the air. When will he counter? And how? Then silence. He leaned toward the mic, and everything changed. The room was vibrating with tension, a string pulled taut, quivering, about to snap. Karoline Leavitt's final barb still hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and her smirk lingered as if she believed she'd already carved victory into the record. For a fraction of a second, you could almost hear her internal script. Patel would shrink, Patel would stammer, Patel would fade. But Patel did none of those things. He leaned into the microphone with deliberate steadiness. Not hurried, not flustered. Calm. His first words weren't barbed. They weren't an insult back. They were quiet, but heavy, the kind of heavy that audiences lean into instinctively, like pupils dilating in sudden dim light. You want to go back to India? His tone wasn't mocking. It was clarifying. He let the question echo. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously. Others froze, unsure what would follow. He paused, long enough for the quiet to grow almost unbearable. Then he delivered the pivot that would change the room. My parents came to this country with nothing. Not a safety net, not connections, not privilege. They worked the night shift in shops. They worked behind counters serving strangers. They worked until their bones ached because they believed in an idea. That idea was America. That idea was that sacrifice was worth it because their children would find opportunity here. That's not a story of going back. That's a story of building forward. The air cracked with the release of something. Gasps, a few claps rising from the back. Patel kept going, each word measured like a drumbeat of truth. I went to school here. I studied law here. And I spent years in courtrooms in your country prosecuting criminals who preyed on innocent Americans. I dedicated years of my life to standing up for the people who believed the system could work. I joined national security teams to keep our country safe, to hunt down real threats, terrorists, criminals, dangers far greater than the color of anyone's skin or the place their parents were born. That's not loyalty questioned. That's loyalty proven. The rhythm intensified, the cadence surgical, demolishing her insult without ever raising his voice. The crowd shifted again, gasps melting into murmurs, murmurs growing into applause. They could feel the truth settling over the room like a rising tide. This country gave me and my family a chance, Patel continued, his voice sharpening with conviction. And we gave back everything we had. We didn't ask if others thought we were American enough. We lived it. We proved it. We served it. His eyes stayed locked across the stage, aimed directly at Levitt, but speaking far beyond her, out to the audience, out to the cameras, out to every living room tuning in. At first, Levitt smirked again, trying to hold her expression. But Sharma's patience had shifted fate. Now every word Patel delivered tightened the noose around her arrogance. You could see it. The faltering in her eyes, the flicker of realization that this was no longer her battlefield. She tried to interject, the start of a retort twisting her lips, but the audience wasn't with her anymore. Every time she twitched toward the mic, she was swallowed by the wave building behind Patel's rising momentum. He leaned forward again, voice steady, voice stronger. You want to tell me to go back? I will not, because I am America. I am America because of my parents, not in spite of them. I am America because this country takes those who arrive with nothing and allows them to fight for everything. That is our greatness, not our weakness. Now the room broke. First popped gas again, then an eruption of applause. Students jumped to their feet. Journalists scribbled furiously. You could see older men and women nodding, eyes glassy with recognition, as if Patel's parents' story echoed their own family's origin. The standing ovation began unevenly, but quickly spread, building into thunder. Patel didn't raise his arms in triumph. He didn't lean back or gloat. He allowed the cheers to swell and then decline before delivering the final blows, the true dismantling of Leavitt's rhetoric. Being American is not about the accident of where you were born. It is about the choice to serve, to sacrifice, to defend this nation even when some would tell you that you don't belong. My family chose America. And if you believe my story disqualifies me, if you think sacrifice and service are less American than sound bites and insults, then you don't understand what being American means at all. Each word was another hammerfall, driving nails into the coffin of her insult. Leavitt's face flushed crimson. She grasped her notes, shuffled them, her once confident sneer evaporating into a stiff, nervous grimace. She had miscalculated fatally. Her opponent wasn't there to play her game. He had rewritten its rules, transforming what she intended as mockery into a moment of inspiration for millions. The crowd surged again, louder this time. People leaped to their feet, clapping furiously. Patel allowed himself one small pause, eyes flicking toward the floor, collected himself as the applause wasn't an ego boost but a collective exhale, an acknowledgement not of Malone, but of everyone who carried stories like his. And then he delivered the mic drop line that sealed the night. Leaning once more, voice steady and crystal clear. America doesn't tell people to go back. America tells people to keep moving forward, to keep fighting, to keep building. That's why we're still here. And that's why insults will never silence us. The room shook. Gasps became chants. Clapping became stomping. The ovation spread like wildfire through the auditorium. News cameras caught the unforgettable scene. Leavitt shifting in her seat, pale and flustered, while Patel stood unshaken, the storm of applause cresting around him. It was, in every sense, not just a counter. It was a turning point. The attempt to demean him had boomeranged into her unraveling, and his triumph had crystallized into a defining symbol. Patel's calm didn't just dismantle his opponent. It electrified an audience starving for dignity, for composure, for resilience against hate. The stage had been claimed. The villain's weapon had become the hero's crown. The hall erupted. But the true storm wasn't in that room. It was about to ignite online. When the cameras cut from the debate stage, the story did not end. It detonated. Within minutes, headlines were already crawling across news tickers. Kash Patel claps back with "I am America" line after racist insult. Clips of the exchange were uploaded in real time, traveling across timelines, stitched onto reels and TikToks. Hashtags multiplying faster than even seasoned reporters could track. By dawn the next day, a digital earthquake had reshaped the conversation. Hashtag Patel for America, hashtag We Are America, and the cuttingly ironic hashtag Go Back to India trending simultaneously. What Karoline Leavitt imagined as a throwaway barb had become the phrase that defined her downfall. Social media did what it always does in moments of public rupture. It exaggerated, remixed, recontextualized. Memes of Leavitt's stunned expression when applause drowned or out-flooded Instagram feeds. One viral post zoomed in on her face as Patel delivered his "I am America" line, making her awkward silence the punchline. TikTok users set that same line against swelling orchestral tracks and hip-hop beats alike, cutting fan edits that turned Patel's composure into cinematic legend. In one particularly popular remix, his words were subtitled majestically across images of immigrant families, doctors in scrubs, kids in graduation caps, construction workers covered in sweat. Everyday people elevated the symbols of America's unfinished promise. Journalists scrambled to reframe their coverage. Was this a turning point in how identity politics intersected with debates? Could dignity actually outshine cruelty in an age addicted to outrage? Late-night comedians picked up the moment, too, skewering Leavitt's arrogance while praising Patel's restraint, turning his counterattack into a cultural touchstone delivered between punchlines. But perhaps more telling than the media frenzy was the wave of support from voices across the political and cultural spectrum. Celebrities with millions of followers reposted his speech, attaching their own family histories. "My grandparents heard the same thing," one actor wrote, "but tonight we all answered back through Patel." Activists heralded his calm as the new gold standard of clapbacks. Even certain politicians, often cautious of comment, praised Patel publicly, framing him as someone who not only defended himself but uplifted a broader truth about who gets to define Americanness. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt scrambled. At first, she doubled down, insisting her words had been misinterpreted, attempting to paint herself as a victim of media spin. But her explanations felt brittle, increasingly desperate, unraveling under the sheer weight of the clip being replayed, dissected, and ridiculed endlessly. Each time she tried to clarify, her tone grew more defensive, her phrasing more evasive. What she didn't realize was this. In politics, perception hardens fast, and once the narrative landed, she was stuck inside it. Her excuse-making only amplified the perception of weakness. Patel, the impact was the opposite. His stock didn't rise because he delivered a clever one-liner. It rose because he showed composure at a moment when nearly anyone else would have cracked. He didn't need to mirror her venom. He didn't need to weaponize the crowd's outrage. He let dignity, that sacred inheritance from his parents, do the work for him. And in doing so, he transformed himself from participant into symbol. Families across the country retold his words around their dinner tables. Children of immigrants saw in him an armor they could borrow for their own encounters with prejudice. Veterans and workers, people who had sacrificed in their own quiet ways, nodded uneasily to themselves and thought, yes, service is a true test of Americanness, not ancestry. Patel's restraint became proof that sometimes principles can still outweigh provocation. The ripple effect wasn't just in memes or hashtags. It seeped into conversations in schools, workplaces, and family chats. Teachers played the clip in classrooms, urging discussions about identity and democracy. Churches, mosques, and temples reposted it as an emblem of faith in action. Suddenly, Patel wasn't just Kash Patel, former prosecutor and national security official. He was Kash Patel, the voice of endurance against hate. The real irony? The insult that was meant to erase him instead elevated him. The words "go back to India" became the trampoline that bounced him into a higher orbit, a new level of recognition, trust, and moral authority. The storm online and in the press kept building, lifting Patel higher even as Levitt flailed. This wasn't merely a viral victory. It wasn't a fleeting hashtag destined to fade. Something deeper was cracking open. Something in the American psyche suddenly confronted with its reflection in Patel's calm defiance. But it wasn't just a viral moment. It struck at something far deeper than trending hashtags. The dust of the debate might have settled, but the message still rang out, reverberating across living rooms, classrooms, and dinner tables nationwide. Because the story wasn't just about Patel and Levitt. It was about something older, deeper, painfully familiar to countless families. The command to go back is one of America's oldest cruelties, recycled across generations, aimed squarely at anyone who dared to be different. It was shouted at Irish immigrants when they landed on crowded docks. It was hurled at Italians, Jews, Chinese laborers, Mexicans, and Caribbean workers. It has stained schoolyards and workplaces for centuries. And now, in the 21st century, its ugliness found a fresh stage, proving the script of prejudice is persistent, a ghost that keeps trying to haunt the American promise. But something extraordinary happened that night. The narrative was rewritten. Patel's calm rebuttal turned insult into anthem, transforming the intended exclusion into a resounding declaration of belonging. By answering not with venom but with vision, he cracked the spine of an old American story and offered a new chapter. His reply said, without apology, "We are America. We've built it. We defend it. We are its future. That is the power of dignity." Too often mistaken for weakness, dignity is in fact the most devastating weapon against hate. Because hate thrives on chaos, on shouting matches, on escalations it knows how to control. Yet dignity rewrites the tempo. It slows everything down. It forces a hate-filled to face themselves in the mirror of their own smallness. Patel's steadiness didn't just neutralize the insult. It thundered through it, louder than any ridicule Levitt could muster. And that message reached further than partisan politics. It dug into something universal. Parents shared the clip with their children, saying, "This is how you respond." Not with fists, but with pride. Students replayed his words before walking into classrooms where they knew they'd be mocked for their accents or surnames. Soldiers and veterans felt seen. as the Patel service reminded everyone that being American is measured not by where your parents started, but by how you choose to fight for the country today. Patel embodied a truth many desperately wanted affirmed. Insults are temporary, but courage can echo for decades. And courage does not require shouting. It requires composure, patience, and the clarity to seize the right moment. His line, "I am America because of my family, not in spite of them," became more than a comeback. It became the very essence of a creed. The lesson extended beyond Patel's story. It reached everyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or othered, because hidden in every insult is also an opportunity, a chance to transform cruelty into testimony, dismissal into declaration. What Patel made visible is that every time someone tries to push you aside, they are unknowingly setting a stage for the moment you rise. And that rise, done steadily and with purpose, can silence not just the insulter, but the centuries of injustice carried through their words. The story that once began with an insult ended with inspiration. It reminded America of its perpetual choice, to sink into the repetition of old prejudice or climb, once again, toward the higher calling of unity and diversity. And in Patel's example, the climb became irresistible, lifting everyone inspired by his words. Dignity is patient. Dignity is unyielding. And, as proven that night, dignity is the loudest possible answer to hate. And that's exactly why this night will never be forgotten. Karoline Leavitt thought her insult would dominate the night. She believed telling Kash Patel to go back to India would leave him diminished, reduced, silenced. Instead, it became the spark that lit fire she could never contain. Patel's response didn't just shock Leavitt, it shocked America. With calm and conviction, he flipped an attack into a declaration, transforming a moment of venom into a victory for dignity, identity, and pride. This is the story promised in the title, and it delivered. Arrogance tried to claim the stage, but dignity stole the spotlight. History doesn't remember the sneer, it remembers the stand. And Patel's stand was one of service, sacrifice, and unapologetic pride in belonging to a country he and his family helped strengthen. The lesson is clear: dignity triumphed. And it always can. For every insult weaponized to exclude, there's an answer waiting, not in hatred, but in truth, not in shouting, but in steadfast pride. Patel didn't need to match ugliness with anger. He needed only to remind us that resilience and composure speak louder than cruelty ever could. Now it's your turn to carry this forward. Share this story. Subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the idea that stories of dignity overcoming hate deserve a wider audience. Spread it so that the next time someone sneers, "Go back," the world already knows the answer. We are not going back. We are moving forward. Because in the end, history isn't written by those who sneer. It's written by those who stand tall. And the record of this night will always show. Kash Patel stood tall, and in doing so, lifted millions right alongside him.